In time. I was drawn to old houses. With my National Trust membership, I had access to hundreds of historic buildings, and in my second-hand car I could visit them as often as I liked. The car had once belonged to my brother, who was 6 years older than me. The National Trust properties, too, had originally been my brother's hobby. He was a history student who could usually be found in one of those old houses, or else in the archives reading about them. Alongside his ongoing research into these conserved properties, he had started to take an interest in urban exploration, abandoned buildings that were like museums, he said, except hardly anyone knew they were there or even thought to go looking. He Googled photographs of schools and factories and hospitals, deserted and forgotten, suspended in time. Our mother, seeing on his computer screen the eerie corridors of some neglected institution, looking at the damage and decay, said he was not to go trespassing in some god-forsaken place, in some ramshackle building whose rotten floorboards would fall away beneath him, or whose ceiling would come down on his head, and he was absolutely not to go alone, with no one to run for help if anything happened. It was forbidden, like crossing the Broomway. The Broomway was a local right-of-way, a 6-mile path over the sands, which could be walked when the tide was out. There was no actual track to follow, though. People lost their way, especially in poor visibility, in the fogs that would quickly descend, or they got sucked in, stuck fast, and anyone still out there when the tide came in was likely to drown. The tally of deaths was incomplete, because not all the bodies could be found. My brother went anyway, and made it across by the skin of his teeth, and said he would do it again, no sweat. There was a house not far from the Broomway, not far from where we lived, that had caught my brother's eye. But this one was not a National Trust property. It was temptingly old, 17th century, according to its Historic England entry. It was a manor house, like the manor house that contained Miss Havisham's heartbreak, like London's Home and Hospital for Incurables, like Nottinghamshire's Stanford Hall, now a rehabilitation centre, repairing our seriously wounded. This local manor house was in between the seashore and the town. The town was small, but even so, when we were little, our mother taught us where we should go if we got lost, where to stand so that she would always be able to find us. The manor house stood in isolation, its gardens surrounded by a red brick wall, on land requisitioned by the Ministry of Defence. You could get pretty close on Google Earth, zooming in to look over the garden wall, to see the front path on which the grass encroached, and the house on which the ivy encroached, and the broken steps that led to the front door whose paintwork had seen better days. The house had been vacant for many years and was now derelict. My brother was set on getting inside. It was a listed building, which, he said, had an oak-panelled hall, and I thought of the grand room we had once seen in a photograph, not of that house, but of our grandpa as a young man at a dance, looking happier than we had ever seen him, and we wanted to jump right into the photograph and dance with him. My brother wanted to find the tunnel that was said to lead from the manor house to the nearest cottage, which was supposed to be haunted by the ghost of a girl who had cut her own throat. He wanted to see the girl as well. He was a sucker for the ghosts attached to these old places. He claimed to hear their footsteps and muffled voices, and swore blind that in Newton House in Carmarthenshire he had felt hands around his neck, though no one believed him. My family had its own ghost story, involving my great-great-grandmother, who was too far back and too far away for me to have known, who lived in India, not in a manor house but in a bungalow, and who, one night, was breastfeeding when the ghost of a cholera victim tried to snatch the baby away. The ghost did not get the baby, but the cholera did. When my great-great-grandparents were interred in their local graveyard, it was said that gold was buried with them. Their graves were destroyed by somebody who, trying to dig up that gold, would have found nothing but the dead. The local house that had caught my brother's eye was privately owned, far beyond the power of a National Trust membership. Poking about online, he found a contact number and called to request access, but his request was denied. The house was in a state of disrepair and could not be entered. It was possible to get into the walled garden, but permission had to be given, and it was not given to him. That was one in the eye for my brother, whose bedroom was out of bounds to me, unless he was there and unless he said so. When we were kids, I always seemed to be at his door, knocking, begging him to play. He sometimes agreed to play hide and seek, though he was too good at hiding and I could never find him. And he liked to play fight. He would sit on my chest so that I could hardly breathe, let alone yell for help. Even after he got off, I could feel his weight on my chest, and how it felt was how I thought drowning might feel. When he went to university, he still lived at home, and I still knocked on his door, but he rarely came out. He was studying hard, said our mother, so leave him alone. He got a first, but afterwards he didn't work. He was not even looking for a job, said our dad. He was just in his bedroom, trying to write a historical novel, or else he was out exploring those old houses. The rare times he let me into his room, I was shocked by the creeping mess, the bad smell. When he finally gave up on his historical novel, he tried writing a ghost story, in which you never actually saw the ghost, and he asked me, "Do you think it would be better to show it?" "I don't think you need to show it," I said. "We know it's there." I thought his story showed promise, but, he said, what would I know? At some point, he abandoned it, and he stopped letting me in. I knew he was in a bad place, but I couldn't reach him. None of us could. "Give him time," said our mother. After he went missing, I went into his room without knocking, and sometimes I touched his things, half expecting him to come out of nowhere and tell me I wasn't allowed, but he never did. I drove his car from time to time, so the battery wouldn't go flat, and in the end the car became mine. I drove it to places of historic interest. I looked at things he would like. I wanted to ask him, had he seen the intricate interior of the Visakhapatnam cabinet at Kingston Lacy? Had he seen the great hall at Knowle? I looked for the ghosts, but never saw one. I looked for a man with shoulder-length hair and the same jacket he had always worn, as if he would not change at all as the years went by. Sometimes I thought I saw him, out of the corner of my eye or just ahead, turning a corner, but when I looked right at him or went after him, I lost him. I went to the archives too, and sat in the silence reading. Did he know that manor house of his had lost its oak-panelled hall decades ago? I imagined him going to all the trouble of getting inside and finding it gone, finding only empty flats and empty offices and the damage caused by dry rot. Did he know that the tunnel that ran from the house to the cottage was most likely only a story? I didn't know for sure, though. Unable to get inside, I had no real way of knowing what was there and what was not. I could, if I was standing in the right place, looking in the right direction, just about see the house, the red brick walls, and the roof with its wrought iron weather vane, and the little black windows of the centuries-old attic rooms which looked towards the sea, towards the miles of sand, and the tide that came in more quickly than anyone could run.